This is ridiculous. This is a slam dunk example of BBC bias and the BBC's failure to do journalism, to tell you what's actually going on in the world. Let's just listen to this clip from BBC Breakfast. It's from this morning. It's discussing Donald Trump, the United States, and Greenland.
Good morning, 6 o'clock. Welcome to Breakfast with Sally Nugent and John Kay.
Our headlines for you today. Using the American military to acquire Greenland, the White House says it's one of the options President Trump and his team are discussing.
Let me just read that back. Let's just read back what was said. Using the American military to acquire Greenland, the White House says it's one of the options Trump and his team are discussing. If you're wondering what that noise is, it's a howl of pain emanating from the grave of George Orwell. Using the American military to acquire Greenland. Acquire. Is there any other word in the English language that might be, I don't know, maybe a bit more appropriate? I mean, there are, after all, around 170,000 words in current use in English. It's not like there's a lack of options here. A little thought experiment for you. Imagine this story was about Russia talking about Latvia. Would the BBC say, using the Russian military to acquire Latvia? Can you imagine? Do any of you think for a moment that would happen? Now, we all know what they would say. They would correctly say, by the way, that Russia is threatening to invade Latvia and annex it. That's what they'd say. They would foreground the fact that this would be an act of armed aggression, an illegal act of armed aggression at that. Note the text as well. They're using on their on-screen banner, US Greenland plans. Euphemistic doesn't even begin to describe it. They're talking about it like, I don't know, government plans for transport or education. Use plans for things like going on holiday, spending time with friends and loved ones at the weekend. To emphasize again, we are talking about the US illegally invading territory in an act of aggression. Would the BBC have as their on-screen banner Russia-Latvia plans? I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but it is ridiculous. If Russia was talking about invading and annexing Latvia, I know they wouldn't. You know they wouldn't. And what's more, BBC journalists and their editors know they wouldn't. We should use this as an example and take a stand, because we saw how the BBC refused to do their job during Israel's genocide, and I'm being euphemistic there. We can see how BBC journalism is completely failing when it comes to Donald Trump going on an armed global rampage. This is a public service broadcaster. If you're British, you pay your £174.50 a year license fee, and you should expect in response the BBC to get the very basics of journalism right on matters of global importance. So let's complain. It's www.bbc.co.uk/contact/complaints. We'll put that in the video description, so you can just click on it. On screen, when you're asked what your complaint is about, select TV, programme/schedule, and then for the TV channel, select BBC One. Then when you're asked if it's about a previous complaint, select no. Though many of you may have complained about other things. I hope you do. The programme title is BBC Breakfast. When you're asked when it was broadcast, say the 7th of January 2026. When you're asked how you watched or listened to the programme, select recorded and say it happened about a minute into broadcast. The subject of your complaint is up to you. Something, I don't know, like coverage of Trump's threatened invasion of Greenland. In the complaint itself, I'd quote the fact the presenter said, using the American military to acquire Greenland, and included the banner, US Greenland plans, when the BBC was talking about the US militarily invading and annexing Greenland in an act of aggression. Note, they would not say that if this was Russia. It might be worth preempting them and saying, it doesn't matter if wider context is talked about by guests or journalists elsewhere. It should be introduced and framed accurately, always. Now, the BBC are using this dire framing across their coverage. Here is a BBC News article. US discussing options to acquire Greenland, including use of military. Say what says White House. Let's force them to explain themselves. That's what will happen with the complaint. They'll have to write a response. How are they going to defend themselves? What's their possible defense? What are they going to say? This is important because the BBC is currently being sued by Donald Trump over their coverage of, and we must emphasize this, whatever they did make a mistake there, by the way, but didn't detract from the fact it was, as we must emphasize, covering his incitement of the attempted coup in the United States from exactly 5 years ago. The substance was correct, but they're being cowed. I mean, to be honest, without that, they'd probably still be terrible on this. With Donald Trump's aggression only just getting started, we've got to take a stand now to demand the BBC does its job and reports accurately on what he's actually doing. Now, as I covered this week already, BBC journalists were sent an email banning them using the word kidnapped to describe the US kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro. Instead, they've been ordered to say seized, the term you might expect to hear for, I don't know, stolen goods or drugs, for that matter. It's not just the BBC either. On ITV, the banner text reads, US discussing options to acquire territory. At least in their defense, they have Greenland threat alongside it. Just so we're up to speed, the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, has said President Trump has made it well known that acquiring Greenland is a national security priority of the United States and it's vital to deter our adversaries in the Arctic region. The president and his team are discussing a range of options to pursue this important foreign policy goal. And of course, utilizing US military is always an option at the commander-in-chief's disposal. In other words, the US is determined to invade Greenland because Denmark's not going to, or Greenland, they're not going to go, okay, he'll fine, have us. That's not going to happen at all. So that means the only option, so-called, they got is an invasion. It's absolutely clear that Donald Trump's determined to do exactly that. That will be the end of NATO, because if one NATO member attacks another NATO member, that's the end of that alliance. What are the Europeans doing about all this? Well, the US has clearly noted their pathetic, weak response, the Europeans, to the invasion of Venezuela, the attack on Venezuela, the kidnapping of the Venezuelan leader. They issued a statement clearly written in fear of Trump, declaring Arctic security remains a key priority for Europe, and it is critical for international and transatlantic security, adding security in the Arctic must therefore be achieved collectively in conjunction with NATO allies, including the United States, by upholding the principles of the UN Charter, including sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the inviolability of borders. These are universal principles, and we will not stop defending them. The United States is an essential part of this endeavor as a NATO ally, and through the defense agreement between the Kingdom of Denmark and the United States in 1951, Greenland belongs to its people. It is for Denmark and Greenland and them only to decide on matters concerning Denmark and Greenland. It's just so weak. They can't even say that an infringement on Denmark and Greenland's sovereignty and territorial integrity would be unacceptable. Can't even say unacceptable. So what are they going to do when Trump invades? What they should all do is collectively impose sanctions on the United States. They're not going to do that. They're just going to wring their hands some more. Now, I want to hear some more voices from Greenland, given it is Greenland. Here's Tilly Martinusson. I know I've said that wrong. A former Greenland politician.
Magnitude of what is happening, that the future of Greenland could decide the fate of NATO.
We are aware, however, we are, I think, even in more disbelief than maybe the European countries are, that US is threatening its allies since World War II, where they were the heroes. I mean, every movie that ever came out of that country, America is the hero, and all of a sudden they're now the villain. We just can't believe that. Greenlanders talk amongst each other. Some are frightened. Most are so angry, I can't even tell you the choice language that they use on social media. Demagogue is probably one of the nicer words that they use about him. Treating us like prostitutes and something we can just take over. Is also some of the nicer words that have been used about it. It's very disheartening that a country I have been to and been traveling to so many times for vacation, I think 13, 16 times. I love America. All of a sudden it's not our friend, but an opposing force. That is wild. How can we live in this world?
Look, there's the looming threat of a US attack on Colombia, Mexico, Nicaragua, and Cuba, amongst others. We're going to keep covering all of this. Unlike the BBC, we'll tell the actual truth. Please like and subscribe, leave your thoughts and your comments, help us take on the dire media at patreon.com/OwenJones84. You make all of this possible. And share the video. And I keep saying I'm writing this book, The Fall of the West, lots of material. It never ends, which will be out later this year. But when that's done, I'll focus much more on the channel. Thanks for keeping the show on the road. Speak to you about.